Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
You know it's an emergency episode day when, Brad and I pretty much knew this was happening as we recorded last episode. We said as much without saying as much, but you really know it's an emergency episode day when big time, showtime, Evan shows up. Welcome back. You only show up for the big ones.
I even showered right before I drove over here, so you know it's a big, and I brushed my teeth, so it's a real big day. A real big day.
This is your wedding day? Jeez.
It might be. It might just be.
The Patrick Kane saga is over, and, you know, Evan, I'm giving you some crap here for being gone on a very fun golf trip recently. You played Tobacco Road, very cool, but I do have to give you credit because regarding the Patrick Kane saga, I want to note that you were the first one on this podcast to say it.
The universe was speaking to me.
Lobstradamus. And for those who don't know, that's a play on words from Nostradamus. But Evan Lobstradamus strikes again. You were right all the way back in, what was it, June? That you said it for the first time?
I'll just believe you.
Oh, I could have lied and said it was my idea.
Foresight, fantastic. Recall, non-existent.
We all have our strengths and weaknesses.
It comes at a great cost. But Patrick Kane has indeed chosen Hockeytown, which is why we are recording not even 2 days after our most recent episode. It is worthy of an emergency episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. So here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and Patrick Kane coming to Detroit. Welcome to the show. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast, you can imagine we're going to be talking about Patrick Kane. Everything that him choosing Detroit means for Hockeytown, means for the team, what's coming up, what we can expect from him, details on the contract, why it's not official at the time of recording, you know, here Tuesday late afternoon, and everything in between. And time provided, we'll cover some other league news, which there's been a lot of. It's been a weird day for Chicago fans, as Corey Perry is on waivers for contract termination and the wild rumors there, and lots more before we jump into overtime. Before all that, a couple of notes. First of all, Winged Wheel Podcast Night with the Grand Rapids Griffins is on Saturday, January 27th. Go to griffinshockey.com/WWP to get your tickets. They do sell fast. I think there are maybe 30 tickets left at the time of recording that have these special co-branded Grand Rapids Griffins and Winged Wheel Podcast hats attached to them. After those run out, they run out. So you guys have actually bought quite a few of those already. So if you want your tickets, griffinshockey.com/WWP. Again, it's the same as Winged Wheel Podcast Night at the LCA in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings, but we're taking it to Grand Rapids for the first time. There's going to be a pregame live show featuring head coach Dan Watson and Grand Rapids Griffins players, and less importantly, us three, the hosts of the Winged Wheel Podcast. We're going to attend the game together, and there's going to be lots more there for you. So again, griffinshockey.com/WWP. Also, this week is going to be a little bit weird in terms of content. So we had the Sunday episode. The usual Wednesday midweek episode is going to be replaced by this one, and we'll be back with you on Sunday with a special edition of the Winged Wheel Podcast, a Red Wings Roundtable that's going to feature some special guests and some added content that we're going to pre-record on Thursday. So the schedule is, you know, our most recent episode before this one was last Sunday. This one, which is posting Tuesday night, and then you're going to be waiting until next Sunday for some content, but it's going to be a little bit of pre-recording in there. Okay. Patrick Kane choosing Detroit. Initial reactions, go.
I'm going to say a little bit of surprise, even though the rumors were that Detroit was in the mix the whole time. I think the best emotion that I can describe going through me right now is cautious optimism. We know what Patrick Kane has been. We know what he was last season, and we know the injury recovery he just got over and the giant question marks around that. You know, he comes in with a, we'll call it checkered past. From the on-ice perspective, it's a no-risk move. He's on a one-year deal, which that was probably the most surprising part to me. I figured Detroit had a legitimate chance at Kane because he was interested in them, and if Detroit outbid the other teams by even a little, that could have got it done. But $2.75 million on a one-year deal, was genuinely surprising because I figured other teams would have went a little more aggressive than that. Who knows if they actually did or didn't. So if, much like Nicholas Backstrom, he does not recover well from his hip resurfacing, it's for the rest of this season, you can easily hide that contract. Not that the Red Wings will even likely need that space this year. And then you recalibrate in the summer. Or he is almost what he was last year, which is a huge get for the Red Wings at $2.75 million because he was still 50-something points in 70-something games playing injured last year. So we know he's a defensive black hole. We know he is not the MVP level player that he used to be. But even last year, he was still very, very productive and an elite playmaker, which is the biggest thing the Red Wings are lacking up front.
Yeah, to see a one-year deal, and I'm going to offer some context in a little bit here in terms of how this all played out with the contract, as in terms of the information that we were able to gather over the past couple of days. But to see this come in at a one-year deal, the cap number doesn't matter if it's a prorated one-year deal for the rest of the year. It's $2.75 million on the cap. Kane earns, I think, a touch over $2 million for the rest of the season. That's the actual dollars. But 1 year and low cap, it frees Detroit's cap space up for the rest of the season. I don't think they're going to be maxing out their cap this season, but it's better to have the flexibility than not. That's as low risk as it gets. We'll talk about all the history and context of Kane as a player later on in the conversation here. But yeah, this is a free asset where, worst case scenario, his hip resurfacing goes the same way it did for other, top end players who had it and weren't able to come back, and he goes on LTIR. Or he's able to come back and be what we saw him do late in his career with Chicago and New York, and he's a huge boost to the team. Or he's a very cheap asset who's even a fragment of that, which is still, as you said, Brad, a very big boost to this team. There's not a lot of risk here. And there's also a business side of this. Like, this is generating a ton of buzz and excitement. And, the engagement that we saw today is among the highest that we saw all season, going back to the win streak at the start of the year. So, it gets Hockeytown excited and makes Red Wings fans excited. One more thing I want to add, though. The first thing that I thought about this is the second big name to want to come to Detroit. Alex DeBrincat forced his way to the Red Wings. Patrick Kane chose the Red Wings in the end. And again, I'll talk about the process of how he landed on Detroit, but that's not nothing. That's actually huge. That's a big turning of the tides, going all the way back to the Mike Babcock days, where free agents weren't choosing Detroit. They didn't even want to meet with Detroit because of Mike Babcock. And when Detroit was at the lowest lows of the rebuild, they had no interest in coming to such a terrible team. So that's two big names now in 1 year that have chosen Detroit. And that's a huge, important indicator that Detroit is back on the map of important hockey markets.
Yeah, I think the last time I was on and we talked about this, I was, very cold about the Patrick Kane experiment. And I don't think I'll change my mind on that. But I do agree with everything you guys said. Like, now that we'll call it a finalized contract, we know the details now. To me, the risk is extremely low, and you get to see what this guy still has in the tank. So if it works out, wow, what a fantastic get for the team. Adds a little bit of production. If it doesn't work out, well, it's 1 year and it's low cap, so who totally cares?
So the way this played out was, over the last couple of days, it became a very, very poorly kept secret. Talking to folks who understood how the negotiations were going, this got out. Like, we knew for certain yesterday. I just couldn't pin down the details of the contract. So Yzerman still is able to keep that under lock and key. Actually, it's funny. As of yesterday, I was chatting with you guys. The best information I had was that this was going to be multi-year. And the advantage to signing a multi-year deal would have been that, it wouldn't have qualified as a 35-plus contract under the CBA, which has a bunch of advantages, especially in terms of what happens to the contract if a player retires, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the situation here because he signed just a 1 year deal in the end. So the process of getting to this point was kind of all over the map. I know Kane wasn't thrilled. I know Steve Yzerman wasn't thrilled that it got out, but it was much like DeBrincat coming to Detroit. this was one that, everyone kind of saw coming. And I think that's just the nature of things when so many teams are involved. Speaking of the other teams, I think Elliot Friedman has done a lot of really good reporting in this space. He talked about Dallas being Kane's preferred destination. You see the way Dallas is playing this year, like they're a wagon. They are among, if not the cup favorites right now. So for Kane wanting to play for a cup, that makes sense. Also got a couple tips that Kane would have loved to have gone back to the Rangers, but GM Chris Drury over there was evidently not interested in whatever the terms that Kane was putting forward was. So that also makes more sense than Detroit if you're saying, oh, he wants to go to a contending team. Why did he pick Detroit? Well, teams like Dallas and New York were higher up on his list. And then ultimately settling for a 1-year deal with Detroit. He has ties to the area. We've talked about that. Playing here when he was younger, knows a lot of the guys around. Makes sense. But yeah, I think this was just a lot of teams were in on it, which is why so much information was floating around. And was this Kane's primary choice? By all indications, I don't think so. But I think it was one of his top choices in, a smaller handful of teams.
He also had indicated that, allegedly had indicated that distance traveled was a big criteria. And Red Wings have a lot of short flights to different areas. So in terms of travel schedule, I'd say the Red Wings are probably one of the better teams in his list of teams that he would have been willing to go to. So that was a huge factor too, allegedly.
Yeah.
Well, we're ignoring the most obvious reason why he would come to Detroit, and it's simply they're a wagon this year. So how could anybody say no?
And that's why we're recording this now and not after their Wednesday game against the Rangers.
Yeah. When everything starts to go off the rails again. No. Obviously, it's good to see premium players pick the Red Wings again, even if it's not the preferred destination. There were a lot of teams that were interested. He met with the Leafs. He met with the Sabres. He talked to a couple other teams. And even Friedman was saying there were other teams involved that he couldn't quite pin down.
Bruins tried to get in on it.
Yep.
Which is the most Bruins thing ever.
Good GMs are in on everything, though, realistically. And he ended up in Detroit. And it's a bet on himself, though, because he's going to get a couple things in Detroit that he wasn't going to get in some of the other bidders. One, and as weird as this still feels to say, might be playoffs.
Yeah.
If he was toying with the idea of going back home to Buffalo or Detroit, well, right now Detroit looks like the more appealing option, which could have been a factor, but he's also going to get a huge opportunity in Detroit. I don't think he's going to walk right into the first line or necessarily even the second line game one. They might ease him into it. Remember the Thomas Vanek special? Mm-hmm. That might make a lot of sense for how you ease Patrick Kane into the lineup. Because if anybody's thinking he's going to be productive this year, I understand. I don't think that's going to happen game one. I think he's going to have to, get a good chunk of games under his belt before he starts to feel normal again. And yeah, maybe you toss him on the third line with Sprong and whoever else and give him some sheltered offensive starts and a lot of power play time and then see how it goes from there. But eventually, yeah, he's probably going to play in the top six, probably with DeBrincat. And if that goes really well for him and the hips hold up and he's productive, even though it'll be a 35-plus contract next year, he'll get paid. There were a lot of suitors for him right now with this gigantic question mark over his head in terms of how he's going to recover. If he squashes all those fears this year, he's going to get paid again. And maybe that'll be with Detroit. Detroit will get first right of refusal on him because they can negotiate ahead of time. And yeah, it's not a bad bet from Patrick Kane given the other options he had available to him.
Let's talk about what the hip resurfacing surgery means. And I know we've talked about this probably 17 times so far, but now that the entire thing is done, what does this mean and why is there so much doubt? It's an operation that isn't conducive to being a pro level athlete afterwards. It's not something we've seen NHL players come back from. And the reason the tides turned on the sentiment with Kane after the hip resurfacing in terms of, being optimistic about him being able to come back and play, despite the video his agency put out, was Nick Backstrom just had to retire from the league, essentially, after having that same procedure. It's tough. Hockey is an especially mobile sport that requires your hips to be pretty agile and limber and capable physiologically, and that's not a good procedure to be having and still be able to play at a high level, especially at 35 years old. So do I have optimism? Someone asked me today, they said, what do you expect from Kane? Or, you're talking about the low risk, high reward. Are you optimistic that he can come back and do this? I can't honestly say that I am. I'm going to be talking today about what Kane could possibly provide, because it doesn't quite matter because it's so low risk. If it doesn't work out, it's LTIR, and then we just get the Red Wings as they have been for the past, couple months, and that's still well and good. But is he going to be able to come back from this? He would have to be the first, really, to do it in a significant way. I'm not saying that's impossible, but the evidence and the history isn't on his side. So I think it's logical to come into this with a healthy amount of skepticism, which you shared earlier, Evan.
Yeah, the precedence has already been set with Nick Backstrom, and he's a playmaker who doesn't rely on foot speed at this point in their career, kind of like Patrick Kane. So that's where my pessimism really kicks off. So I don't know. I'm still super skeptical of it. I think it's hilarious that Patrick Kane is a Detroit Red Wing. If you would have told 20-year-old Evan that Patrick Kane would be playing for the Red Wings, I would laugh in your face. They're going to make $2 million in just jersey sales. So the money is money well spent.
I think about Mike Modano. I think about Daniel Alfredson. I think about Chris Chelios is like the ultimate example. Although
he ended up playing for like 10 years.
Yeah, that turned out to be like, he's as much a Red Wing in my mind. Darian Hatcher, like, you go way back. This isn't the first time the Red Wings have done this. David Legwand, and we don't have to get into all that. Patrick Kane he's definitely going to move the most jerseys.
Absolutely.
And
there's people who are buying that jersey just out of spite.
Yeah.
Like me. I am considering it. And if anyone knows me, I am not a jersey guy at all.
But to piss off Chicago fans?
God, it's getting close.
Outside of everything, Brad referred to it at the top of the show, like, Kane does have a checkered past, to put it lightly. And even outside of the more recently, like, he was on the team during the Kyle Beach scandal. Yeah, this is a guy who Red Wings fans, like, he was public enemy number one through Red Wings in their biggest modern rival, which was the Chicago Blackhawks. After Colorado, I think it was Chicago in the next era. And Patrick Kane was at the forefront of that. It wasn't Taves. It wasn't anyone else. It was Kane. And you love to hate the guy.
And the best part about Patrick Kane as a player is not only is he cocky and he talks about himself in the third person, calls himself Showtime, he's arguably one of the best American players of all time. So he backs it up with skill, and it just drove Red Wings and other teams' fans crazy.
And now he's a Detroit Red Wing.
Now he's a Detroit Red Wing.
What the hell?
Even the superimposed versions of him with the Red Wings kit on looks so weird to me.
I know.
You know who this really worked out for? Daniel Sprong.
Oh. Yeah.
Can you imagine the Rolex he's getting out of this?
He's getting a good one. And hey, those are hard to get too. So he's probably going to get, I don't know, he might be able to get a Daytona out of this with the amount of money that Patrick Kane has pulled in. Don't do it for just a regular day date, Daniel. Hold out for the Daytona and maybe one of the gold ones too.
It's a good day to be Daniel Sprong.
Oh, man.
We're going to need the social team to be really on it over the next few weeks as Daniel Sprong walks into the building every game. Get a close-up on that wrist just to see.
Daniel Iced Out Sprong is his new name. So, Patrick Kane, those are the hesitations about him and, coming back as a player who had hip resurfacing surgery. Evan, you alluded to it. Let's talk about who Patrick Kane is as a player in this point in his career. We know his goal-scoring prowess from earlier in his career. I don't think anyone's expecting, like you mentioned, MVP levels of production. But Patrick Kane, with reduced mobility, with a reduced ability to kind of make as big of an impact on the game, what can he still bring to the table if his recovery and return to form goes well?
What I'm hoping is a new dynamic to the power play. And I think that's probably the safest bet of what he will actually be able to do. Because I'm with Evan. I'm extremely skeptical of what he's going to be able to do at 5-on-5 with. He was never a burner to begin with. And if he has slowed down even more, I do see a real likelihood that he's going to struggle to keep up with the pace at 5-on-5. On the power play, however, your pace is generally defined by your brain, and to which he has one of the most elite minds in the history of hockey with the way he can move the puck and see lanes and manipulate players open. You get him on the half wall with the puck on his stick, he doesn't have to move around a ton to absolutely burn a defense in that scenario, especially the chemistry he has with DeBrincat, and obviously they would put them on the same power play unit, you would think. So if Kane can tread water at 5-on-5, which I think would be a win in this scenario, but be a huge boost to the power play, that alone makes his contract a home run.
Yeah, I don't think Patrick Kane, all goes well, would be the difference maker between Detroit making the playoffs and not, if they were like in a, imagine the position Buffalo's in right now, or even worst case, Ottawa. Like out of the playoffs, things aren't looking too great. I know Buffalo just had a win, but still, I'm not saying Patrick Kane can come in and do that. But with the position the Red Wings are in now, which is a playoff spot and playing reasonably well most nights, he can come in and boost the scoring, boost the potency and the consistency of the power play, like you said, Brad. And if you are able to be creative with how you're deploying him, like you mentioned, he's not going to be terribly mobile, and you want to essentially try to magnify all of his positive traits and minimize his defensive ones. That means a lot of offensive zone starts. You can make him impactful enough where, is he the main driver? No, but he can be an impact and needle mover in terms of keeping this team in a playoff competitive space some nights.
For me, deployment is going to be number one, and it's going to become more difficult on the road when you get a last change. I personally, just thinking about it a bit today, I think he would be excellent as a third line player. Get Comfer and Sprong there, because having a god tier playmaker on his line might really awaken something in him. And then obviously the power play, his creativity is, almost unparalleled when he was in his prime. Just having him there will, keep the scheme always sort of open. It'll be harder for teams to game plan against the Red Wings power play. That's kind of where I see the ideal fit being. If things really go well, maybe you slot him in on the second line, move DeBrincat down. There's a lot of options there. It's the big question mark is, how is his ability to play at the NHL level post hip resurfacing surgery?
Yeah, that's the foundation of all of this. And if that crumbles, then it crumbles, and this whole thing just becomes, we were excited for a little while there, and it ended up being nothing. And that's fine. It's harmless. We all know the risk coming in.
It's probably still worth it for a lifetime of Detroit Red Wings legend Patrick Kane memes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's already worth it.
My one buddy's a diehard Ottawa fan, and the day the Red Wings signed Alfredsson, his life basically crumbled in front of my eyes. So today's been a good day.
And I'm sure you were very graceful about that.
Oh, as always, I was very gentlemanly and very graceful in his defeat.
And that's all you need to know about it. So that's Patrick Kane's play style, and we talked about where he might fit into the lineup. We'll get to that more in a second. Something I didn't mention earlier, I think it was Frank Sarvalli put out there, that some of the difference making for Patrick Kane, the couple points that are believed to have pushed him in this direction, counting the fact that Dallas didn't seem to be a landing spot and New York didn't seem to be a landing spot, is one, the DeBrincat thing. At this age, at this point in your career, Patrick Kane has to be thinking about maximizing opportunity for himself. Yes, to be competitive, but also to show off what he can do. And you're going to need help. Like, there's not a 35-year-old in this league, except for Sidney Crosby, apparently, who is able to come in and be their maximum player without setting themselves up for success. And he's played at an elite, like, all-world level with Alex DeBrincat in the past. And Alex DeBrincat is still in his prime. So you're setting up a kid like that, then yeah, that's going to be one thing to help you. And evidently the other thing that moved the needle for him was Steve Yzerman flying out to Toronto to meet Patrick Kane. We knew Patrick Kane met with Toronto in Toronto, and it's not breaking news or anything, but Steve Yzerman going out there and meeting with him was part of kind of what brought him over.
And not to mention, allegedly, Patrick Kane had a glowing review for Derek Lalonde and how he thinks the game, how he sort of sees how teams play in the X's and O's. So the Red Wings had a lot of off-ice items that they could pull from to really sway Patrick Kane to eventually signing with Detroit.
where does he fit into the lineup? Like in terms of actual lines, Brad, I know you mentioned DeBrincat on the power play. Evan, you mentioned maybe a third pair with Conference Sprong. I actually really like that combination. It might be a bit much based on how much Detroit has to lean on Comfer right now.
Yeah,
I would
zero
say.
chance he's dropping down to the third line right now. He's one of their most productive players.
So their last game, the lines were Veleno, Larkin, Raymond, Kostin, Fisher, Sprong, DeBrincat, Comfer, Rasmussen, Fabry, Kopp, Perron. And deployment is going to vary. Like they lean on Comfer, DeBrincat, Rasmussen enough where is that really a third line? I don't know. Who sits out is likely to be Fisher or Kostin, and then whatever injury is. We'll get to Larkin and Berggren later on in this episode, but where does he fit in there? I think you're right, Brad. They'll ease him in to start. Like I would hesitate to cement anything right when he gets in. It'll probably just be a lot of sheltered power play time and really taking it easy on him. But long term, I would doubt we're going to see him much on a first line, for example. It just doesn't seem
that would be shocking to me.
Not impossible, but he would have to have a comeback of all comebacks.
And even then, are you gonna, if he's thriving on the second line, are you gonna break that up? What is best case scenario for Detroit right now? They're already kind of, sort of trying to work out with bumping DeBrincat off the first line for the last week and put him on the second line. They've been trying Veleno with Larkin and Raymond to, I'll call it lukewarm results. So I don't know if it'll be Veleno, maybe it's Fabry, Perron, whoever. They want to find someone to play that left wing role on the top line that doesn't diminish the top line, which would then ideally free up the Red Wings to make a second line of DeBrincat, Comfer, Kane. Because if Kane's comeback is even remotely successful, all the jokes we've made about how bad this second line in Detroit are go right out the window with that line. Because Comfer has proven to be, at least for this season, one of the best offseason free agent signings in the league. We know what DeBrincat is and can do, and if Patrick Kane is even 70% of what he was last year, now you have legitimate threat on the second line, which then frees up, a third line of, we'll say, one of Fabry, Veleno, Kopp, Rasmussen, Sprong, whoever. And again, they've always had a good third line relative to the rest of the league, but that would really put it over the edge.
That's legitimately a good third line.
Yeah, and that doesn't even factor in where Perron might settle in, right? So the Red Wings get depth out of this, and they've already been able to out-depth a lot of teams this year. So as long as Patrick Kane is capable and reasonably productive, it does open up a lot more possibilities for this team.
To be annoying and give the qualifier again, all of this assuming Patrick Kane does come back and is productive. It also makes moving off the first line way more palatable if you're a Red Wing. Like, they've been doing well, so it's not been a problem that DeBrincat moved down. That seemed to actually have been working out. But you think of years past, if you weren't on the first line with Larkin and Bertuzzi previously, or Larkin and Raymond, you essentially were doomed to have an uphill battle in terms of being productive. We saw the Red Wings try to do it with Raymond, didn't quite work out. We saw the Red Wings try to do it with Bertuzzi, it didn't quite work out. It was extremely hard to be productive, except for that Guelph Storm line for 12 games. Lower down in the Red Wings lineup, and that's not because the Red Wings are cursed or anything special. It's just that when you're a bad team and you don't have good players, and you're not playing with good players, it's hard to be a good player. Production begets production, good players beget better players. So, you're a first-line player, and for the sake of changing things up, or the coach wants a different look or whatever, you get moved off the first line, and then, one of your wingers is Patty Kane. As a Red Wings fan, think what you want about Patrick Kane, but I promise you NHL players, that does not go unnoticed, and they would love the idea of playing like that. If Patrick Kane comes back, plays well, and I'm getting way too far ahead of myself, he's staying in Detroit beyond the season. Let's say it goes really well, he signs an extension, it all makes sense. Other players in the league are going to want to come to Detroit because it's no longer just Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond to play with. You have more in terms of playing with some of the best players in the league to help your game. All right. There's going to be a lot on Patrick Kane, and one of the big questions is timeline. I laughed when I saw the schedule.
It's a good week if he does want to play.
We're not going to see Patrick Kane against New York and Chicago. That doesn't seem to be the way this is trending, and we'll talk about roster logistics in a second here. But it is kind of poetic that the Red Wings' next 2 games are against the New York Rangers and the Chicago Blackhawks? Like, that's just the hockey gods are being a little bit too overt with their script writing thing.
Yeah, you gotta be less predictable than that.
We all live in a simulation, and, the lab scientists are just pushing some buttons because they're bored after their shift right now. In terms of actual timeline, though, this is all a little bit made complicated. They still have to finalize the deal at the time of recording. Derek Lalonde talked about needing to finish, dot some I's, cross some T's. There needs to be a physical, but at this point, you know what you're working with if you're at this point in the contract with Patrick Kane and his situation. It doesn't really matter. He's going to need some time to kind of get up to speed and everything, but I don't think we're going to be seeing him back this week.
No, it's very unlikely. A player coming into a team mid-season in general is tough, learning the systems, the power play, the whatever you want to learn about the team. Then you double in the injury recovery and how quickly can he even get up to game speed. Special players tend to do it faster than most, but even a special player coming off hip resurfacing is not getting up to speed fast. So I genuinely don't know what the timeline is, but yeah, I'm anticipating it not being fast.
One other point about this, someone reached out. They said, it feels weird seeing Kane in a Red Wings jersey and that he's coming to Detroit, obviously because of the rivalry, but also they addressed, Red Wings fans have really hated this guy for a long time and have had no problem pointing out his checkered past. And most recently, he was part of the Kyle Beach team, Chicago Blackhawks, which, the allegations came out that everyone on the team knew, and there have been conversations and real litigations that we're not going to do here today about who knew and what they were told thereafter in terms of punishment and when Aldrich left the team, etc. And they were like, am I weird for being squeamish about this? And my answer is no. I don't think that's unfair at all. The reality is this is what the NHL is. They've already shown what they're going to do so far as, punishment and handling the Kyle Beach and Chicago Blackhawks situation. The Red Wings brought in this guy, and I promise you, every other team in the league who was interested in him as a hockey player would have done the same. This is just the reality of where that entire situation has played out. Look at how Jonathan Toews, as a captain, young player still, but as a captain, and his reception in the league thereafter. For any fans who have a mired opinion, I don't fault them at all. If you want to know what the league thinks about it in terms of hockey players, Patrick Kane had a lot of suitors. Simple as that. Okay. The Red Wings, I mentioned one thing about the Red Wings and where I think it puts them in terms of the playoffs. What do you think in terms of your outlook, and balance everything? The likelihood of Patrick Kane coming back and being effective, the likelihood of what kind of player he can be. Would this procedure even have made him a better player than what we saw with the Rangers, for example? All of that factored in, real life prediction. Do you think this makes a meaningful difference? And if so, how much in which direction in terms of the Red Wings' ambitions this year?
Meaningful is a subjective term. I think it helps is probably the best way I can put it. They're already in a playoff spot with how they've been playing, with what they've been doing. I don't think Patrick Kane hurts their roster. Even if he's not performing well, you can always shelter him, power play specialist, low minutes, and if it gets real bad, he just sits in Cleary's cabana for most of the rest of the season. And it'll be unfortunate if it happens, but if it happens, hey, yeah, it's tough business. Sorry. However, if he is, again, even 70% of what he was, that does not put this team backwards. It just maybe adds only 1, 2, 3 points to the standings, but with where the Red Wings are likely to be sitting in April, that could be a substantial difference.
I've said it once and I'll say it again. I am extremely skeptical of what we're going to see out of Patrick Kane, and I would love for him to return to a higher level. Maybe he will be better than he was in New York now that he's had the surgery. It's just a lot of question marks that remain outstanding there. And until I see Patrick Kane in an NHL game, my God, in the winged wheel, I'm going to remain skeptical. And it's not like I'm not excited or anything. Like, this is crazy that Patrick Kane is a Detroit Red Wing. But there's the big question mark looming over it is what we're going to see. The Red Wings have lots of outs. If this doesn't work, he can, play extremely sheltered minutes like Brad said. He can sit in the press box. And there's allegedly a no move or a no trade clause involved as well. So it's low risk. We've already talked about that. And if Patrick Kane comes back and is actually a useful NHL player, my God, will this be amazing.
We know what I feel. I think, again, agreeing and reiterating for the millionth time, it can't hurt. I have the skepticism as well, but even a low-level outcome here is still a net benefit for Detroit. And as Brad said, every point or 2 points or 3 points matters in the end, especially with the playoff cut line maybe being a little wonky again this year. I'm all for it in terms of, this can only help. All right, some news on the Red Wings. As I mentioned, Dylan Larkin is going to be out for the Wednesday and Thursday games against New York and Chicago. Jonathan Berggren was called up, and so we'll see him in action. The Red Wings are going to go with 12 forwards. Justin Hall was a bit banged up, but will be ready to play. Jake Wallman is also going to be good to go. If you just see the Red Wings call up a defenseman, Derek Lalonde has said that it's going to be just for insurance because they're going to go with 12 forwards in 60. Now, also, Ville Husso is going to get the start in New York, which leads you to believe that it's probably going to be Lyon in Chicago, but we'll see how that plays out. Let's talk about some NHL news now and some news around the league, but
why did the Detroit Red Wings get Dean Evason fired?
Are we still in a, my God, he lost the Detroit Red Wings, so Dean Evason hit the road? Like, is Detroit still that bad of an image for the league?
Are they stuck in like 2019 Detroit Red Wings? Is that what they're still thinking?
Their perception, man, that was building up for a long time, but it is.
Ottawa's really hoping we play them soon.
Yes, they are. My thing is, okay, you get rid of Dean Evason. I don't think things were going well in Minnesota. I have some opinions on terms of the amount of dead cap over there and what you're able to do with that team, but overall that team wasn't playing up to standards. And when your best players aren't playing well for that long, preparedness and coaching, it does come into question. Why did they then go and hire the most Minnesota Wild-ass coach of all time in John Hines? If you told someone about John Hines' career and the kind of coach he was, but never told someone what teams he played or coached for, they would have assumed it would have been the Minnesota Wild. Like, yeah, maybe they'll get a new coach boost, which you've seen with John Hines specifically in the past, but I don't know. That it just is more of the same. And for a league who I think is actually doing a good job of breaking away from the good old boys coaching cycle, what are you doing that for? Bring in Jay Woodcroft. At least the guy has won games.
What if he didn't want to?
Yeah, it's a very fair point.
It is the Minnesota Wild after all. Every time a coach gets fired, I've gotten in the habit lately of doing over the past few years of doing the same thing. I immediately run and go check at the team's save percentage. Yeah, I don't think it was Dean Evason's fault.
No. Well,
I think they've got one of the worst tandems in the league right now.
yes.
Marc-Andre Fleury has been washed for a couple of years now, and
some might say many years.
Not me. Maybe you guys.
Oh, that's right. I forgot you're on the other side of that argument. I missed it when you were gone, honestly. I take that back.
Wow, really?
No. I take it back. I take it back.
And Gustafsson had a good year last year, but how many times have you seen a goalie come out of nowhere to have a great season just to turn back into a pumpkin at midnight? And that might be what's happening here. Kaprizov's doing nothing, which you could argue, the coach has to get his guys going, and a lot of the important players in Minnesota aren't going. I have a hard time believing that's on the coach, especially when the team save percentage is sub 900, like substantially sub 900.
There is an amount of, guilty satisfaction that comes from, this team is the one who was the final nail in the coffin. You never celebrate someone losing their job. He's still going to get paid. That's the beauty of being a coach that's fired in the NHL. That's the dream, actually.
That's the dream.
Mike Babcock made out like a bandit.
Oh, he's living the dream
Twice.
for sure.
Twice he pulled that.
Well, think about like when Joel Quenneville went to Florida. He insisted that Bobrovsky, which is now hilarious because Bobrovsky was notably struggled. he insisted that Bobrovsky was there, and that's
Paid.
not by mistake. That, you know, good coaches have good goaltending. So to see is how it played out in Minnesota is not totally surprising.
All right, let's talk about Corey Perry.
Oh, God.
The internet's so stupid. As a regular participant, as someone who's in all capital letters way too online, just so stupid. God, so dumb. I want to say that at the time of recording, the Chicago Blackhawks GM Kyle Davidson has started his press conference and has already said that he won't be able to disclose many details about the Corey Perry incident, as it's referred to, which has led to Corey Perry being put on waivers for the purpose of contract termination. He did say, however, the rumors about it involving players or families, read Connor Bedard and his mom, are wildly inaccurate and frankly disgusting. And
He ain't wrong.
call me soft. Genuinely call. I have no problem if you want to rib me for this. But the whole time this was happening, I'm like, you know, we all grew up in hockey dressing rooms. We all like inappropriate jokes.
We've all
like
been on
digging
Xbox Live.
Yeah, like we know how it goes. But as this was playing out, all I could think was like, man, Connor Bedard has a thankless task of being the next face of the league, has come in, done it with a smile on his face.
Well, he doesn't smile much.
No, but for him, that's a smile. He's a Sidney Crosby type, right?
Oh, 100%.
And he's doing all of the media. He's doing 6 interviews during game time. In a 60-minute game, he's not even going to the room at intermission right away because he's doing interviews. And then just the world runs rampant with this rumor, and you're just like, you feel for him and you feel for his family. It's just, I was squeamish about it. I was just like,
Chicago did an absolutely tragic job of getting in front of this
Yes.
too. They let this thing percolate and let the knuckle draggers such as myself I was not a part of this, but the knuckle draggers that are adjacent to me,
yeah,
build this
familial knuckle draggers.
Yes, exactly. Build this thing into this crazy unsubstantiated rumor,
Which is mind blowing to me that Chicago didn't get out in front of something.
Well, they have.
I got him with that one.
I don't know if you're keeping that in. So
Oh,
I was
that's
trying not to
staying.
laugh.
That's staying.
It's been a while since he's been that clever. It has to stay.
That is true. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, we don't control the editing around here, so it's a bad look once again for the Chicago Blackhawks organization, who refuses to do the right thing. Like he's the star player potentially of the league over the next 15 years. You got to protect those guys immediately. You got to go out in front of the cameras and say, whatever crap you're hearing online is not true. We will deal with the rest internally. There's an ongoing investigation. End of story.
So the one thing, I'm not going to defend the Chicago Blackhawks. I will never defend the Chicago Blackhawks, but I will make one point about Kyle Davidson specifically, just to present the other side. He did say the right thing today.
Oh, absolutely.
It was just too slow.
Yeah.
In internet terms.
Yes.
In the real world, from when these rumors started to now is not a very long time at all. But you have to understand how the world works in a perpetually online world, a way too online world, as Ryan so adequately put it. You have to get on it. If you have to crawl out of bed at 2 a.m. and drag yourself to a microphone, you have to do it in today's day and age. You have to. And, you know, Kyle Davidson's a young GM. He hasn't been in this role long. He said the right thing. It was just too late. And now he has to understand going forward, he does not and will never have the luxury of time when shit hits the fan.
And it's not, you know, corporations, organizations, they almost always move incredibly slowly on these sorts of things. They always seem to attempt to gather all the facts. And the fact now that there's a contract termination involved in this, you know, for sure lawyers are involved, so you got to make sure you get that right, and you can't say the wrong things, which I totally understand. But yeah, you can't let Connor Bedard get dragged through the mud like this.
Doesn't matter what's true and what's not, even before the denial. You bring in one of the Infinity Stones to change reality at that, but you have to protect Connor Bedard. You owe it to him.
Oh,
You
yeah.
owe it to
That's
him.
a bad look.
Regardless, even before Davidson's denial, some other things that have been out there, and again, this isn't based off of any insider information, and I hesitate to say too much in terms of what actually happened, but there's, rumors going out about conduct in terms of, what was the statement, in terms of a safe work environment and player safety, which makes you think of, for example, previous hazing incidents or conduct, like maybe you're out on the town the night before a game or something on the road. There's a million different things it could be. The fact that it led to contract termination is all you need to know, that it wasn't nothing, because the PA does not stand for.
They're not happy about those sorts of situations.
No. Anyways, what an ugly mess. Unfortunately, there's a really funny part about this. They were talking about Corey Perry being, he was actually having a very good season with Chicago to start. He was an important part of that team. I mean, they're terrible, but still. And I think Kyle Davidson said something like, you're going to have to kick him out of the league if you want him to retire.
Oh, did he say that today?
No, like on.
Oh my God, thank God.
No, can you imagine he said it today? But like, it was like 2 weeks ago or something.
Oh my God.
Oof.
Again, the hockey gods. It's a bit on the nose for me.
Do things change quickly or what?
Yeah, I know for the length of this podcast, we've hated the narrative of, every team has to bring in that old wily veteran to mentor the young kids. With the Lucic and Perry things now, can that narrative die, please?
Well, the Perry one was working.
Was it, though?
It was working on ice.
One's working, too.
The Perry thing on the ice was working, but that whole mentorship thing apparently not.
Nah, you gotta... I don't know. I can't pretend to know these guys personally. How many times have you ever heard of a guy who's like a terrible person in person, but just an excellent guy to guys in the room? Like, the hockey players are all terrible. We're all terrible people. Like, that's just the rule.
This is true.
But are you the extra layer of terrible or just average terrible?
That's right.
Anyhow, we'll see what the actual details are. It's going to get out eventually. Even if you remember, back to when Jim Montgomery was let go by Dallas, and that was an substance abuse thing. Like, they held that back for as long as they could, but it got out eventually, as will this one. So I'll say we'll see, but I'm nervous about what happens in the interim. So something I want to call out, poor Max wrote a really, really great feature on Simon Edvinsson, and Simon Edvinsson and the quotes he gave Max, and talking about not being called up to the team, and he's doing really great stuff with Grand Rapids right now, and has essentially done all that he can do to show that he belongs on the Red Wings and is waiting his turn. Anyways, that feature launched this morning. As much as we have the podcaster's curse, the same amount Max has the I just wrote a big feature as a hockey writer curse. So I'm going to link it in the description of this episode. There's going to be so much Patrick Kane content, especially from us over the next while. Do yourself a favor, read this article. It's really great. I think Simon Edvinsson joining the Red Wings can have a bigger impact on the team than Patrick Kane joining the Red Wings this year. So it's worthwhile to read.
Yeah, the writer's curse, the podcaster curse, it's real. Yeah. And last night, I think I even said on the episode on Sunday, there was an exact date and time that would be my worst case scenario for the news to break. And you text me 3 minutes off that exact time yesterday. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
I know. How funny was that?
I almost lost it. But Max definitely got the shorter end of the stick on this one.
We haven't become masters of this universe, but we've become very good observers.
Yes.
We know when we're about to be walloped.
Well, like I said earlier in the episode about Evan, it could apply to all of us. Foresight, great.
Yeah. Oh, God. All right. For an emergency episode, you don't usually have so much content. And yet, Chicago Blackhawks adjacent news has filled the NHL world today. So, thanks, I guess. Let's jump into overtime on this emergency episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. You get access to things like our Patreon exclusive Discord. You also get access to all of our giveaways. For example, we're giving away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going to our Patreon supporters. Also, you get access to all of our bonus overtime content, or any bonus content that we put out there. For example, after every episode, we record a overtime or bonus overtime Patreon exclusive segment where we answer any questions that we didn't get to on the main show. We let loose, have fun. We do a segment called Thoughts with Evan where you get to see a horrifying insight into this man's mind or whatever's rattling around in there.
Just wait till this one and I talk about the golf trip.
And it's actually going to be very good and lots more. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Let's take some questions from our patrons here. Frank Stanley says, with the signing of Kane and the call-up of Berggren, who do we waive or send down? Do you think a trade is in the works to ship out a defender or a goalie? So, addressing it now, that's more of just a Larkin thing. Long-term, I still do wonder, though, about goalie. Probably not the answer for this one, but I still am intently watching what happens with mostly Reimer, but really any one of the Red Wings 3 goalies.
That's the most likely. But with Patrick Kane now, you could argue they have a surplus at every position now. One of Costin or Fisher's probably scratched every game. Berggren might end up back in Grand Rapids. They already are carrying 7 NHL defensemen when everybody can and should be making the case that Simon Edvinsson could be up here. So just because goalie makes the most sense, I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. I think it could be any position here if a trade is in the works.
All right, next comment here from Norris Sider says, regardless of how the Kane experiment unfolds, I think this should lend more trust to the Yzer plan without having the foundational advantage of draft luck like so many perennial contenders. Theoretically, incremental moves like these are what will pave the way for our return to the Cup. Instant gratification is always nice, but at least we can be thankful for cool moments like this in the Cat acquisition along the way. Cheers, boys, and thanks, Steve, for the early birthday present. I believe I'm as old as Brad as of tomorrow. No, you're young. Brad's old, remember.
Yep.
It's all about perspective.
And how you feel, and I feel old.
Oh, yeah, you look like you feel old. That might be the meanest thing I've ever said to him. That was a bit much, I'm sorry. Clapping Bombs, I'm not going to read the rest of that one, says, do you guys think Sprong deserves a look higher? It's exactly what you think it was.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you guys think Sprong deserves a look higher up in the lineup than the fourth line minutes he's been getting?
Yes and no. Especially with Kane here, the question would be, if you're talking about putting Sprong in the top 6, who do you pull out of the top 6? I wouldn't mind if he got a look with Raymond and Larkin if he's comfortable on his off wing. I wouldn't hate that. If DeBrincat and Kane do end up on the second line, he's not getting in there. So I think he does, but I don't know where to put him.
With Sprong, it's a little bit of why was he not deployed more with Seattle last year? Why isn't he getting more this year? And there's more to the game than just converting offensive opportunities, but that is also the name of the game in the modern NHL. So maybe there's a little bit of a poison chalice isn't the right way to phrase it here, but you add more time, you add more deployment, you're not necessarily going to see a linear scale up of his production. Overall, I really like what I see from Sprong's game in general. Is it perfect on ice? No, but offensively, he brings a touch that the Red Wings need.
Yeah, and those deficiencies that were advertised when he came to Detroit, I haven't really seen those as glaring as people made them out to be.
They're there, but they're not like...
Yeah, they're not extreme.
Yeah, it's as much as most other players.
Exactly. So, yeah, if they want to experiment with him in the top 6, I'm fully on board for it.
This one here from Coyote Season Tickets and Anywhere But Tempe says, what a long way we've come since being slighted by Stamkos, eh? We talked about that in the show. Like, legitimately, it's a frame shift of how Detroit is perceived. I think DeBrincat was definitely a big move in that direction, but a lot of that was this is his hometown team. Kane choosing Detroit, even though other teams were in the mix, like, that means something to other players. It will mean something to other players. Next question from Soft Dump in the Corner says, anybody else see a correlation between the apparent Yzerman visit to Kane quietly skating in Detroit for the past few days and Lions' recent ice time showcasing? Lion to Edmonton, maybe? Seems like a pretty convenient timing to me. Add in Edmonton's lack of cap space and Lions' cheap contract, and I would say he looks pretty darn appealing to Kenny. Also, currently watching last night's game between Ottawa and Florida. Everybody on the ice gets a game misconduct. That was hysterical.
Phenomenal content.
As a referee, you have to dream of being able to make that call.
Elmira native Garrett Rank.
Was that Garrett Rank?
Yep.
Of course it was Garrett Rank.
I've not had the Red Wings have not had a lot of good Garrett Rank games. He was part of the stick throwing game for for the Red Wings.
He's very good friends with one of the guys I was on the trip with.
Oh.
So when he saw that clip, he was dying.
So on the Alex Lyon thing, this is one of those things to not overthink. You are correct. Edmonton could and probably should have a lot of interest in Alex Lyon. He's playing great, and their goaltending sucks. However, the reason Lyon got in to play for Detroit was twofold. One, Husso had a kid, and the Red Wings had a back-to-back in Sweden. So it was very unlikely a goalie was going to play both of those games. And two, leading up to the game where Lyon played, Reimer and Husso sucked. So it was the most logical time to, hey, we need a goalie to perform if we want to make the playoffs. We gave this guy a 2-year contract. Let's see what he's got. And he's played very well. So for a team like the Red Wings, who have thoughts of making the playoffs, as now giantly signaled by the signing of Patrick Kane, they need to play whoever the best goalie in their organization is at any given time.
And the NHL has never been more of a 1A, 1B goaltending tandem than it is right now. So if you've got one guy who's playing well and you got two guys you're kind of not totally sold on, you don't trade one of those two options. You got to see what you got still.
Joe Falzone says cap-friendly houses with approximately $10 million in cap space at the deadline. Obviously, injuries would dictate additions first, but right now let's have some silly fun and pretend Stevie buys. He shouldn't. Who would complete the bonkers hat trick of DeBrincat and Kane?
I'm not even going to say a trade. Johnny Tays comes out of his hiatus to finish the season.
You're going to give some Red Wings fans some aneurysms.
I gave myself an aneurysm. There's a non-zero chance, not a good chance, a non-zero chance that by the end of the year, the Red Wings could trot out a line of Alex DeBrincat, Patrick Kane, and Jonathan Tays.
Dustin Byfuglien's been secretly working out to prepare for his return.
He's got a pro fishing career. He's got like a stat page and everything.
I've never seen a guy just not care about playing professional hockey quite like him.
He is built like a Mack truck. Like he has so much natural athletic and hockey talent, and the dude just loves to just not care and be big.
The hit he had on Mark Stone was one of the biggest hits I've ever seen in my life.
Also manhandling two, was it Vegas players?
He just picked up two guys like they were like his carry-on luggage.
This question from Not Steve Yzerman spying on you says, would you say the addition of Kane signifies a shift in how Steve views the franchise, that now we are starting to approach the window to add win now talent / pieces?
I think the last 2 off seasons have signaled that.
I agree. That definitely the shift is there. Like this is a step, but we've been in that phase for a little while now, I'd say. The start of that was the Cop off season.
What I will say, and even just based on everything I've been reading today, this was the signing where the rest of the league noticed. The rest of the hockey world noticed. I was even listening to a podcast, and I was listening to it on the way over here. It was weird how they almost seemed surprised to this point when they looked at, okay, the Red Wings got Kane, let's dive into it. Oh, they're ahead of Ottawa and Buffalo and Toronto and Tampa. Like, yeah, it's not a new development. The Red Wings have been playing well this year. They bought this summer. It makes sense they go out and acquire Patrick Kane. So this doesn't change anything for the Red Wings, but I think the perception of the Red Wings is very different today.
And last one here from one Will Bukima says, question for Brad.
Oh, God. What type of secret base bullshit am I in here for? I love it.
What does the Kane signing mean for Brady Cleveland? I had to give you that one. We love Will, and I had to give you that one.
What does it mean? Nothing.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for tuning into this emergency episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. As Lobsterdamus himself ascertained would happen in the offseason, the Patrick Kane episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. There's going to be more to come. The content over the next little while is going to be a little bit funky, so there's going to be no midweek episode this week. This is our midweek. But what we will be doing is recording after the Thursday game. So after both games, we'll be recording a little bit, and that's going to go into our next Sunday episode. That episode's also going to feature our Red Wings roundtable with some special guests. And then you'll also be celebrating, a lot of you, but you'll have, after the Sunday episode, you'll have 2 episodes without me. So Brad and Evan have the reins. God help you all. Have mercy on all of our souls for whatever happens to that. And if I come back to an intact podcast, then I'll talk to you later in December. But that's going to be our content schedule. But thank you all so much for tuning in to this surprising and unsurprising episode of the Winged Wheel podcast, and an exciting time for Hockeytown, a confusing time for Red Wings fans. And I mean, this is our first in-season emergency episode of the year. DeBrincat kind of happened after we recorded, but still. But this was fun to do. So we'll see where this one goes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. And if you're a listener of old, I say again, pretty wild departure from where the Red Wings were when we started this show. To all of our Patreon supporters, we could not do this without you. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you do want to support the show. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels, on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Akefer, Samuel Soderholm, Raymond's Missing Tooth, Icon, Brad's Lord and Savior, Bradley Cleveland, Glenn Brabham, Cider the Ass Kicker, Connor's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Carl Brutanen Analuski, Carl Provy, who's a new name-level sponsor, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Coyote Season Tickets and Anywhere But Tempe, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, DJ Denton, D-Town Westside, Exquisitine Buble Schwinslow, Fergus, member of the Black Eyed Peas, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jake Olam, Jacob Turner, Joel Miranda, Kalen Wood, King Tone, Marcus, Marlon Winchester, Matt K, Cannon Fodder, the Cheesebag Army, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Red 3, Ryan Hubbard, Scott Martin, Scree and Lube, Sprong, 88 for life. Doesn't want to give up the number, eh? That's what I appreciate about you. Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.B., Adam Rose, Axel's Sandy Pelika. A.B. might be a new name-level sponsor. Thank you so much for your support. Big Cheese, Brad Simmons, Brian Vasha, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Clappin' Bombs, Wheelin' Moms, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, D-Boss Snip Show, Dungeon Master of Puppets, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, James Laporte, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, J.M. Rhapsody, John Evans, Derogatory, John Engels, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Linda Hull, Maximilian, Melissa Erickson, Norris Sider, Ophelia, Stephen, Thankful for the Winged Wheel Podcast, the Hodag, the Mexanadian, the Hat 123, Winging It in San Diego, formerly AA Ron, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you, in a way, on Sunday.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.